everybody, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Amanda N, and today, this is gonna be a weird one. There's no way around saying that. I love looking into creepy folklore, but if you're looking at the title, well, this one's just eerie, I'm not gonna lie. There is a Native American legend that's famous in Idaho, and it's the legend of, well, water babies. What are water babies, you ask? Well, let's get right into it. Insider states that water babies are a Native American legend that are found in a couple different places in America, but most famously in Pocatello at the Massacre Rock State Park. The Shoshone tribe was first recorded in 1805 and were roaming the Great Plains as early as the 1500s, so it's not clear when exactly this legend originated. But the story goes that the Shoshone experienced an extreme famine, and the mothers were forced to drown their babies in the river rather than watch their children starve. Today, some people claim that if you sit quietly at the river by Massacre Rocks, you'll hear the sound of babies crying. Other stories say that these babies grew gills and fins and survived, and now they seek revenge on their mothers by luring unsuspecting victims to their deaths in the river. The images of these water babies are really strange, and it isn't just Idaho either. Apparently, these water babies exist in Utah as well, though in Utah the story is far different. Here, the Ute tribes supposedly told stories of a mysterious race of dwarves that lived in the lake. According to one source, they referred to them as water babies because of their clever tactics in luring people to their deaths. They would make sounds very reminiscent of crying babies. Concerned people would take off into the lake in an effort to locate and rescue the endangered babies within, only to be dragged down into the depths by the nefarious water babies. If one actually managed to escape the clutches of these devilish dwarves, they wouldn't be in the clear. A huge, predatorial, man-hating monster also calls the Utah Lake home. The first sighting by a European occurred just at the tail end of the Civil War, when a resident reported being chased to the shore by a 30-foot reptile, which, when turned around, joined another huge beast and then swam off. Shortly after, a different man claimed to see a huge reptile with the head of a dog patrolling the waters of the lake. In 1870, some fishermen found a large, strange skull with tusks protruding from it in the water. Sightings occurred steadily throughout the late 1800s through the 1920s, when they died down. So, it seems there's two kinds of water babies. One that were babies that drowned in Idaho, and ones that were actually just creatures mimicking the cries of babies in Utah. I'll be honest, I'm going into this video extremely skeptical. I try not to automatically assume something isn't real or holds no water. See what I did there? But seriously, I try not to dismiss anything as completely untrue because I like to tear it apart and explain how a legend comes to be. In this case, there's a couple reasons I'm already confident there's no validity behind these stories. Primarily, the water babies in Idaho, well, evolution doesn't work that fast. You can't evolve gills in a few minutes, otherwise no one would be drowning. That's not how growing gills would work. I briefly mentioned this in my Atlantis video as well, you can check that out if you haven't seen it. But hell, even Nevada has their own version of the water baby tale, where Native American tribes would toss sickly babies into a lake. However, history has been known to rewrite many Native American tribes as worse than they are, even calling them cannibals in instances where there wasn't the evidence to support that, so I'm taking all of this with a grain of salt. Even so, whether this is true or not, I was curious to see if this folklore stems from any sort of reality at all. So let's take a look. The Snake River, which runs through the Massacre Rocks area of Idaho, is said to be the main source of all of this paranormal activity. One source specifically states that this famine and these tragedies occurred near Pocatello. Pocatello just isn't a place in Idaho, though. Pocatello, if I'm saying that right, he was also a chief of the Shoshone, for who the city is named after. Born in the 1800s, in 1875, it's said that he did face starvation among his people. It's said that Pocatello led them to the Mormon missionary farm of George Hill in Corinne, Utah, with the hope that a mass conversion of his people to Mormonism would alleviate his people's suffering. Although the missionaries willingly baptized the Shoshone, the local population of white settlers did not receive the Shoshone openly and agitated for their expulsion. In response, the U.S. Army forced the Shoshone to return to the Fort Hall Reservation. Sorry for the jingling, my dog decided she wanted to listen. Okay, anyway, this is disappointing what the Army did, but it's also not surprising. However, this really caught my attention because the two places most known for having these water babies are, as we said, Idaho and Utah. Maybe this folklore sort of followed the Shoshone from Idaho to Utah when they moved there. Either way, a famine did take place among the Shoshone people, so even if the whole evolution of these dying infants may not be true, it's interesting how some aspects of the story are. I did even more digging, hoping to understand where the term water babies comes from. Turns out there's actually a novel called Water Babies from 1862, written by Charles Kingsley. The gist of the story was that the protagonist, Tom, a young chimney sweep, fell into a river after encountering an upper-class girl, and he was chased out of her house. There, in the river, he drowned and transformed into a water baby and began his education. Kingsley uses the book to argue against child labor and other themes, but he also uses really dismissive and insulting references to Americans, Jews, African Americans, and Irish, even dismissive and insulting for that time, so don't go praising him just yet. I was able to download a research paper about the novel from ResearchGate and how it relates to said famine and events of the time. According to this paper, written by Catherine Neely Judd, The Water Babies, WB, written in the spring and summer of 1862, is a politically anxious text. In this essay, I argue that although The Water Babies' overall structure appears to be chaotic and arbitrary, J.M.I. Claver, for example, deems the work a Victorian fantasy crowded with Kingsley's hobby horses where he pours out whatever he had on his mind. In fact, Kingsley's disquietude concerning the Irish famine, U.S. slavery, and the condition of the British working classes provides a logical framework for the text. Ultimately, The Water Babies expresses Kingsley's unacknowledged wish to atone for the past, accompanied by trepidation over a future that may well include extensive enfranchisement and the advent of a redistribution of political power. For this reason, the novel's plot provides an escapist fantasy of preparing the laboring poor for enfranchisement by wearing off for the rough prickles of the English working class. I should like to coddle you, but I cannot, you are so horny and prickly. Horny does not mean that here, just saying. WB 124, Chapter 6. Washing off the, quote, sooty shell of the African-American bondsman, we will hope he will be wiser, now he has got safe out of his sooty old shell. WB 43, Chapter 2. And further obtaining divine maternal forgiveness for our past misdeeds, particularly regarding the treatment of the Irish during the Great Famine, which took place from 1845 to 1852. Through his emphasis in The Water Babies on Ovidian, Dantean, and Darwinian motifs of metamorphosis, purgatory, evolution, degeneration, and reincarnation, Kingsley attempts to solve what were, for him, an indissoluble social and political problems. Okay, that's a mouthful. But anyway, the illustrations in this actual book shows that the water babies are far less alarming. They're still strange, to be sure, but it just looks like a child covered in algae or something prickly, I guess, not the cactus-looking infant we saw earlier. Instead, this entire paper, we don't hear Kingsley talking about water babies being born from children that died during a famine. They were made up for social commentary. That's the gist of what we just said. It really fascinates me how things change in time, and to see a novel go from being just that, a kid's novel, a very racist kids novel, to this eerie, unsettling folklore. Kingsley was a contradictory man. He opposed slavery, and yet he was still incredibly racist and embraced the Confederate cause. So he had some extremely unusual and opposing messages in his work, to say the very least. It's also said that initially the water babies weren't connected to the famine of the Shoshone people, but first linked to the Irish potato famine years prior. Quote, In urging his listeners to not let these little ones perish, Kingsley illustrates the importance of acting as did the Good Samaritan by offering examples of a child who had been left behind by a caravan, unable from weakness or weariness to keep pace with the rest, and had dropped by the wayside till the vultures and the jackals should pick his bones. HS 305, or some poor soldier's wife who trudged on with the child at her back through dust and mire till in despair she dropped her little one and left it to the mercies of the God who gave it to her. HS 305, end quote. So now the question is, did the folklore come first and then Kingsley used the Native American terminology for his book, or did Kingsley's book come first and then that's what people said would happen in 1875 during the famine? This is where things get tricky, and I'm not really sure if I have an answer. There's documented evidence that those terms, water babies, was used in the 1860s for this book. However, every legend that I look on for this folklore states that the water babies happened as a result of the 1875 famine. Right now, it's which came first, the folklore or the fantasy. Yet another source claims that water spirits from Native American folklore, usually associated with the Paiute, Shoshone, Washoe, and Achumawi, I'm sorry for pronunciation, tribes. Water babies are said to inhabit springs, ponds, and streams, the most well-known location being Pyramid Lake in Nevada. They take the form of beautiful human infants, but sometimes they have fishtails. According to some stories, they are reptilian beings, and they have the ability to mimic baby cries. According to Paiute legend, a boy met and fell in love with a mermaid. He was determined to marry her, so he brought her back to his tribe members. They insisted that he take her back to the ocean, which he did, but that wasn't before the rejected mermaid put a curse on the water of Pyramid Lake. Shortly afterwards, 2 women with an infant were washing in the lake. When the women were not looking, a serpent slithered out of the lake and devoured the infant, taking on its form. When the infant's mother tried to feed her child, the serpent infant began to devour her. Other tribe members could not force the serpent to release the woman, so they called a medicine man who made a deal with the serpent child. The demonic infant would be free to inhabit the lake if the young mother was released and restored to health. The demonic child has been in Pyramid Lake ever since. I won't lie, I'm at a bit of a loss. Some say Pyramid Lake is the source of the legend, many say Idaho, and of course there's Utah. Just about every source says something different, frankly, and many do say that this all began in the 19th century. I think that if I absolutely had to give my very best educated guess here, I'd say that Kingsley may have been inspired by some kind of folklore, maybe some sort of mention about creatures in the water, taken his own spin on it, and then, as we've seen with media plenty of times before, the attention on the book, the fact that water babies were pushed to the front of people's minds, that led to this sort of uptick in water baby mentions, whatever you want to call it. This led to the establishment of this folklore after the famine. The idea that the babies perished there were becoming water babies. But honestly, I could be completely wrong. This is one scenario where I really just can't be certain, but the whole folklore piqued my interest enough that I thought it was worth discussing. Whether they're an omen of death that's been around for years in California, dwarves in the Utah water, or those that died of famine in 1875, I have absolutely no idea. But I don't think I ever want to find out. At least not through experience. But with all of that said, guys, that's where I'm going to end today's video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you have anything you'd really like to see next time, let me know in those comments down below. I hope you're well. I hope this video didn't scare you too much or creep you out too much, because it was a bit of an unusual one today. Anyway, feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Bye, guys!